on the show today, Gil Hedley. So Gil Hedley, famous for the Fuzz speech, the developer of integral anatomy, bit of a legend in the anatomy field, actually. So I've been hearing good things over the years from people like my friends Pete Blackerby and Gary Carter here in Brighton, who've done a bit of anatomy with. And yeah, a pleasure, sir.
Same. So you know Gary Carter, huh? He's a nice guy.
Yeah, I was at his wedding. We go back 15 years at least. So,
how wonderful.
I cut up a cadaver with him years ago, so he's definitely increased my interest in anatomy, which I didn't really get before. But I'm sure we'll get into that. Where are you in the world, sir?
I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Sunny, beautiful, in the view of Pikes Peak, 14er.
And I heard you were confirmed for the Embodiment Conference, and I said, I want to speak to him, get him on the podcast. There's a few people that for years I've wanted to be in touch with, and the conference has allowed that. So I'm looking forward to this.
Wonderful. Thank you.
How did you get interested in the body, Gil? I was looking at your background. It says University of Chicago Theological Ethics Divinity School.
That's
I spent
me.
time at Chicago Uni. And yeah, I was like, how did that become this? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, that became this because that didn't serve this. So there was kind of a missing piece there in my extremely abstract academic studies, and I felt in order just to ground myself and make it through my PhD program, where it was considered a virtue not to be in your body, I started doing Tai Chi, found that to be a really worthwhile practice for me, helped me to focus, helped me to get embodied a little bit, because I was not anywhere near my body. And I got into it enough to realize I was in pain. And then I moved into the field of Rolfing and bodywork. So basically I felt that it was kind of disingenuous for academics and ethicists of the kind that I was becoming to be pontificating about the body, inquiring about our ways of being in the world without having any sense of embodiment or connection to the physical self. And so I pursued that consciously and intentionally to try and be that academic who actually got into his body so that I could speak meaningfully to our life lived in a body.
There is that disconnect, isn't there? I actually spent 2 summers as an intern at the University of Chicago at a small non-profit there. And
really?
I was doing aikido every day because I was actually living in the basement of Don Levine, who was he was the dean of Chicago at some point, but he was a sociologist there, but also happened to be an aikido instructor.
I remember him.
You remember Don? He was one of my main mentors.
The Tai Chi Club would sometimes party with the Aikido folks on their mats. We'd go over there and they'd chuck us around and we'd learn a thing or two. So very nice guy.
Old guy, yeah, sadly deceased. But he was a great mentor for me. And, you know, it's really interesting because I was really in there when I was at the Aikido club there. I was really around these very academic guys. So people might not realize University of Chicago is like Yale, Harvard. It's sort of top tier, more Nobel Prizes than anywhere else kind of thing. And it was really weird to sort of be doing this somatic practice with highly intellectual people. I remember going into the bar in Hyde Park, what was it called?
Jimmy's probably.
Jimmy's, exactly, Jimmy's, and sort of chatting up some girls, and then not knowing, then like they'd never met a man with social skills before. It was quite unique as an atmosphere, and in some ways indicative of the kind of body-mind split we find ourselves in the world.
I'd like to, my memory of Hyde Park, I used to always say this is the neighborhood with the most number of people walking down the sidewalk talking to themselves.
It's certainly got we say nowhere to hide, nowhere to park, a lot of crazies. But okay, so anatomy, let's open it up, because to some people, you know, anatomy might be some boring thing they had to study as part of their yoga qualification, or maybe it's something they did, you know, back in high school or whatever, they had to cut up a frog or something. Why is it more interesting than that?
Well, that's why is it more interesting than that? For some, it will never be more interesting than that, I'm afraid. But I'm kind of working on that. I find that the body is literally the universe. It's the holographic universe, and so the privilege of walking around, being gifted with the universe that's completely accessible to you. You don't have to get in a spaceship to go to this universe and to witness the whole, to witness the integrity of the universe. We're walking around with it, whether you're kings or queens or lying on a grate over a piece of cardboard. We're all gifted with this extraordinary vessel. And I find that exploring it as a somanaut, you mentioned that when we were off camera.
Love it. I love the somanaut thing. Love it.
Yeah, because I like to say that the somanaut explores like inner space the way an astronaut explores outer space. And I do believe that if you go deeply into the inner space enough, you'll bump into the astronauts. We're all swimming around in the same unified whole. But I personally like to access that whole through the body, and I found it to be revelatory and continuously so. And if it were a vocabulary study, I'd be bored out of my gourd and would have quit ages ago. But for me, it is an exploration of embodiment. If you can, you know, say the word, you know, navicular, and your foot starts to throb, you're on your way, you know, because it's not just vocabulary at that point. You're creating, what you can do through anatomy is create a relationship with that which could possibly be most familiar to you, but which you may not even be conscious of. And I feel like so many people in their pursuit of spirituality or what have you, or more esoteric disciplines, want to see their aura but haven't seen their hand yet. And it's like, wow, you know, you're kind of missing the forest for the trees a little bit.
Yeah, people say know something like the back of their hand, but I don't think most people know the back of their hand.
Yeah, they don't know the back of their hand. And if you took a little time to gaze at the back of your hand and watch it change over time, you'd be amazed.
And there's sort of two approaches to anatomy, isn't there? I mean, many, but two main ones. One is a sort of outside, objective, you know, cut things up kind of thing. And then there's also the experiential anatomy. The idea of you're actually exploring yourself. There's a kind of, like I've seen you do both. I've seen you cut up bodies, and I've seen you do a dance, sort of showing the heart and the nature of the heart. It seems like you've got kind of both of these angles.
Well, I do, and I think it boils down to intention. So if you're wielding your knife in order to create separation and name things and be very intellectual about it, that's one thing. But if you're wielding your knife in order to actually experience the connection that you're severing, right? In other words, if it's really about feeling the tension on the blade, or with your fingertips, even better, if you're dissecting with your hands, the idea would be that I'm not going in there to create parts, but rather to identify relationships and to experience those relationships. So I can use the dissection process as a means of integrating myself, because I build up an inventory of textures, connections, continuities, and relationships that often escape the regional anatomy process. And that's why I call my work integral anatomy. Some people would have me just toss the word anatomy altogether. I like the word anatomy. I just like the word integral anatomy better. Because it conveys the sense of what my pursuit is about, which is about relationships and connections and continuities and textures, rather than about words and objects and things and parts.
And that is you're throwing some amazing concepts out very quickly and almost casually, so I always want to slow it down a little bit here. It's like the idea of anatomy typically is one cuts up, one separates, one says, okay, we'll get that. You know, as you're sort of focusing, we get rid of the fuzz, you know, and that we don't need to worry what that is. We'll cut that away, and we separate out this, and now this is a muscle, and we've cut that out, and this is this, and we've cut that separate from that. And it's very much in the sort of mindset of separating. So a sort of holistic, integral, systems-based, relationship-based approach is really quite radical.
Thank you for noticing. I appreciate that, because it is different. And I found that the folks who are involved in the other type of professors who stumble through my room because we're sharing a space or something, I haven't found any of them objecting to it. They tend to be amazed and intrigued and excited. And I've had professors say, that's the way we ought to do it. but you don't, because with the regional anatomy approach, you literally destroy the relationships and continuities before even getting a chance to observe it. So on day one, people in my courses, for instance, will observe the entire superficial fascia when we reflect the whole skin. And the professors never see that. They do the arm, they do the leg, they do the back, they do the chest, they do the head, but they never see that single layer goes across the whole body. And so it's just in the bucket and they've never noticed it. And then on my class with brand new people who've never dissected before, revealed this thing to them who've been in the laboratory for 30 years and never seen it. And they're like, wow, that's cool.
That's very interesting, isn't it? That we have this idea that sort of perception is somehow neutral and we see, we just see what's there and naively. And actually, as you say, it's what's ignored, what's in the bucket is a great metaphor there, I think, thrown away in anatomy. And what are people looking for? That something can be there for years and just hundreds of years even.
That's right, hundreds of years.
Seen. That's actually quite a profound thing if you start to think about what that is.
It is, and it's shocking. It's not seen, it's invisible, it's literally invisible in plain sight. And these are major structures. Then there's the more minor ones that interest me as well that are also hidden in plain sight and don't make it into the books. No books about these things. I'm working on it.
It does seem like there's been something of a sort of second renaissance of anatomy. Like there was this, time when people didn't know what was going on in the human body and you weren't allowed to cut it up. And then in the Renaissance, maybe people started to go, well, what is inside? And, other cultures hadn't done that so much. There was Indian cultures.
It was taboo.
It was taboo. It was illegal, right? And then it was kind of, some was loosened and they had to dig up graves and things. And then they were like, look, there's this thing. It's not what is in your imagination. The reality is this. And then there was this sort of period of a few hundred years where people go, okay, we've done that. We know anatomy. And listeners may not realize that stuff still gets discovered or re-looked at freshly. They may have some sense like, didn't we figure that out in the 17th century? Has anything new happened in the last 300 years?
Well, something, it's one of those catchy things that a reporter can write up every year or so. Shocking revelation, new thing discovered in the human body. And everybody's like, how could that be? And it's like, no, really, look at this. And it does sell some newspapers or get some web time, but I do feel like it is possible to actually look at the body with fresh eyes. And I think what enabled me to do that was I wasn't taught it, basically. So I just sort of stumbled in out of my own curiosity without having been exposed to regional anatomy, except through my Rolfing training a little bit, but even that was tweaked by, say, Tom Myers, who I know is part of the conference as well, and a very old friend. I've known Tom since 1991, and he started talking about layers, and I was like, layers, that's interesting, And then when I tried to do a little dissection myself, I followed the medical textbook and found myself just hacking it up and disrupting those layers. So I thought, let me redo this. Let's throw out that book and let's just run with the idea of layers and see how the dissection comes out. It came out very profoundly instructional and transformative, just to see it, just to like witness that thing that isn't in any book, and to repeat that process until I could refine it to a degree that it would be continually revelatory. And I continue to learn from the same process. I've done it hundreds of times and I continue to be like, I see more and more and more. It's like looking into a mist and things, just slowly appear before your eyes when you do it this way.
And yeah, I think it was Pete or Gary telling me they discovered a fifth muscle in the quadriceps, so you can't call them the quadriceps anymore. Really, really quite, what? No one noticed that? No, apparently not. And also in terms of, we've studied dead bodies, right? And we're trying to study this thing which is conscious, moving, alive, after it's been dead and covered in formaldehyde or whatever. Like, that's got to affect people's perception of what anatomy is.
Whatever you show up with the table is, you're sure to see it. And certainly, if you don't give an accounting for the interpretive act of witnessing the dead in order to understand the living, you're missing the boat. So if you won't see much in microscopy if you don't kill and stain stuff, right? So you're going to put that sliver on a slide and you're going to put dye on it, because otherwise you won't see a thing. The light will go through these transparent structures and you'll miss them completely. But when you kill, stain, dye things, then you learn stuff. And it's not dissimilar with the formaldehyde-laden cadaver. Basically, it's like a stained slide. You can see a lot, and it slows down time for you. You have more time to work with the form. But if you don't include, a continuous consciousness around the fact that this is an artifact, and in fact, it's not merely that the cadaver is an artifact and an abstraction of the living form, but every stroke of the scalpel introduces an artifact, right? So you can't dissect without without falsifying it. But if you know that you're falsifying it while you're dissecting it, then you can at least glean, from that process something, a story that can be told. And it's not dissimilar with our words, which are slicing up reality with every utterance. And at the same time, we speak and learn about our world.
I want to come back to the language thing. That's interesting. It strikes me as almost a process of falsely creating nouns out of a verb. Does that make sense? Like there's something which is a process.
Yeah.
And
this is very true. That's very true. Yeah. When I put people in front of the table.
Gil, sorry to interrupt. Your internet connection's gone a bit choppy. I don't know if there's anything you can do there. Is it solid, or I think we're good this end?
Hello.
Yeah,
it's choppy still.
Yeah, it's only the visual. The auditory is fine, but it's like you've gone into slow motion visually. We could always just not use.
Oh gosh.
It's quite a strippy effect. You know what? We can always take it and just use it on the podcast because the audio is fine, and we don't have to use it for the YouTube.
Very good. I'm glad the audio works at least.
So you were saying.
So you were talking about sort of nominalizing our moving world, and yeah, I think that's a fair analogy. And I always stand around the table and try and invite people to recognize what's missing here, right? In other words, and it's stark. You've said you've done dissection. The difference between the living and the dead is stark.
Yeah.
In terms of movement. And so I'll say fine, but that doesn't mean you can't learn about a river's path by looking at the bed it formed, right? And there are artifacts of movement in the body that I'm tracking. And it's no different than a footprint, by a good tracker in the woods. He can look at a deer's hoof and the way it hit the mud and tell you something about the size of the animal and the length of its gait. And it's basically, I do consider the work of the anatomist to be that of a tracker. And if it's not, then well, I'm not doing that. But I see it as kind of, I'm looking at water's footprints all over the body. And I'm trying to witness the movement of breath and life and fluids that have left this form as its artifact. I don't mistake the artifact for the reality. I don't mistake the model for the reality. I know the reality is much grander. However, from the lens of the artifact, I can learn something about the reality, and I try my best to do so. And then the question is, if it can be integrated into my life, then I'm moving in the right direction.
What do you think are some of the main misunderstandings about anatomy then, like in terms of just the systems of the body, how it works? I mean, just do a bit of myth busting for us here.
Well, even I have a friend who always says, so you're a systems guy. And I'm like, no, not even a systems guy, because even the systems themselves are just concepts that are parsing out aspects of the body which are completely and entirely integrated. I mean, we project so much onto our bodies from our culture. We think in our Piscean hierarchical culture that our brain must be in charge. It must be a supercomputer, or everything else must be following it. It's not the case. It's just more mud in the bucket. In other words, the whole body is constantly working together. There's no real preference in the systems. I mean, you can take out a lot. I mean, I worked on a guy who had half of his brain taken out. He wasn't the worst for wear at the moment. You'd be amazed at what you can get away with on this planet.
That's good news for me, Gil. It's good. I think about half my brain's working right now with the conference, so that's good news. I can manage on half.
Well, I can definitely imagine that the other half is well occupied with that with that enormous task. So I'm
There's a
gonna
lot on.
cut you
There's a
some.
lot on. But this, I'm also just getting to speak to. I spoke to Stephen Porges today, who's like one of the big names of anatomy. I spoke to one of my heroes from the sort of British environmental personal growth scene. It's just like fascinating how many people I'm in contact with through this. So
Yeah, you're the lucky fella. You get to touch bases with everybody.
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I get kind of casual about it after a while, but it's certainly a privilege. It's certainly a privilege. But
Well, once your mind has been blown like 50 times in a row, what's left to blow? Do you get, are you jaded with,
it's easy to get a bit arrogant with it, and it's easy to get, how can I say that, just like casual with, like, I talk to Zen masters on a daily basis, not just sort of smart people. So it's kind of like, I don't know. Like the only slight negative side effect, mostly I'm just in wonder and I'm happy. That's generally
Awesome.
my state with it. I'm just like, cool, I get to speak to Gil Hedley. That's generally how I am, And it gives me lots of energy. The only slight disadvantage, I've noticed myself getting a little bored of the mundane. Like just normal conversations with sort of, kind of, I don't want to be snobby, but kind of like normal people who aren't geeked out on this stuff. So that's the only slight disadvantage I've seen. But then there's another part of me which is quite Taoist and can kind of get into the magic of the normal as well. So that's not too bad a side effect. What about you? Who does it bring you in contact with? I mean, you spend a lot of your time in rooms cutting up dead bodies. I mean, it's kind of an unusual way to spend a life, right? You're doing that, you're teaching. How has it impacted? Let's reverse this. How has it impacted you to spend so much time with cadavers?
I have to say, I've spent more time in this particular year with cadavers than ever in my life, and it's been a continual revelation how little I know, and how after all these years I can be shown up and surprised on a daily basis by what is absolutely mundane. There's little more mundane than specks of flesh in dead bodies, and yet they continue to astound me, surprise me, draw me in, compel me to look closer, to observe more carefully, to reconsider my prejudices, my beliefs, my preferences. It's constantly a revelation, and that surprises the shit out of me, to be perfectly honest, because you'd think it'd be over by now.
Right, it's done by now. There's a humbling quality to getting into anything deeply, because anything just keeps opening up, whether it's wine tasting or aikido or anatomy. I've talked to many people on the podcast who've had a similar experience, and some of them I think are just saying it, because it sounds good, but like I genuinely believe you and most people who say this, that like when they get into something deeply, it's humbling because it keeps opening up what they don't know, and it draws. But it strikes me that almost you've chosen the most humbling topic, because
it's literally made of humus. In other words, it's the humble is the earth. I learned that from reading Charlotte's Web long ago. And it is profoundly humbling. Also, to be basically paging through somebody's diary who's passed away, and seeing the evidence of a life. And
tell me what you mean by that. That's great. The evidence of a life. Give me a couple of examples. What do you mean?
Well, you're scraping along on a bone, trying to make it shiny, and you're like, oh dang, this rib was broken and healed. That was an experience. Somebody felt really badly right there at some point, and now it healed, and they moved through it. And that's remarkable. And oh, look how something is stuck underneath here because of that. Or you're paddling along, everything looks fine, and all of a sudden you run into hardware that it's like, whoa, there was a hard experience there, and then there was this need for surgery, and there were experts who came in, and there was a recovery time, and maybe you never fully recovered, and yet the tissue healed over that. And I can't help but think, whoa, these are the footprints of a person, of a life. It's not generic. They're not all the same. And in fact,
bodies
what
are
I'm
quite
finding
different.
this is the essence of integral anatomy, is to start with the specific example rather than the averaged averaged mean, right? And I always say that the mean is kind of mean.
Mean is
Because
mean.
the
You
mean is
destroy the
mean.
individuality. You destroy what makes, like, an average of anything is dull.
Yeah,
Like,
and
you
nobody
look,
can live up to it. Nobody can even live up to the average because nobody matches it. Literally nobody. So I reject the study of nobody as the standard for anatomy. And
nobody is not a good standard, is what you're saying.
it's a terrible starting point. So I would
What
rather
is,
start with somebody and then recognize somebody as the absolute 100% perfect example of human anatomy, and to not exclude the next body as another 100% perfect example that's different. And so
give some
different.
examples, because this will astound people. I've seen some of these examples, but bodies can be very, very different, can't they?
Well, just look off one face to another, one person in a supermarket to another. We're all quite different, and then somehow we expect the insides to be exactly the same, and yet they're as unique. The physiognomy is no more representative of our uniqueness than is your liver, or one vertebrae in your spine, or one pair of ribs twisting around each other, and are utterly unique. And I was so shocked last year, or 2 years ago, I don't remember the first time I did it, when I decided, to run a class, an extended length of class, and to include as part of the class a commitment to skeletonization. So to not open any of the joints. And we worked with unfixed tissues and used a lot of ice to make them last longer so that we could have movable joints in these 4 bodies. And so we went on the course of 10 days from an entire human form to their skeletons. And we still knew them and could recognize them instantly just looking at their skeletons, not because their skeletons look so much like their bodies, they look very different, but because the skeleton also retained the uniqueness of the individual, or represented the uniqueness of the individual. And it was surprising. And, we had done it a year before with just 4 femurs as a test run. And it was like, oh my gosh, not only are the 2 femurs unique, but then you compare it to the next body. And I was like, oh, I have to do this to the whole skeleton. And now I'm committed to that process and repeating it. Because it's like, how did I miss that after 25 years that I didn't?
Big stuff like organs on other sides, right? We're not just talking about slightly longer tibias or something like. We're doing like
no, we're talking about shape, and that human shape. We are an amazing creature in that we really have very different shapes, and the idea that any one shape is representative of the human form, or one shape is the healthy version of the human form, is quite ridiculous. And even offensive to me, because really the variation is the human thing, and that the human body, if we would stop thinking of it as our own body, but that the human body is all the bodies, the human species has a body, and that we can extend our concept to include the larger human form and consider all the individual representations of it legitimate expressions of the larger writ large human body. And my whole idea about what is a body is really transformed over the decades to be much more inclusive.
And that's a wonderful idea, isn't it? It can be extended, like variation as itself, the human thing. It's good. Perhaps there are people on the political left and the political right. It's good.
Absolutely, it's what makes the planet turn. And when you start to dogmatize and specify as if one could be right, you're really practicing some strange religion then that I don't want to be a part of. When in fact we have this literally the disequilibrium is what makes us walk. The disequilibrium is what makes things go. If we don't have some disequilibrium amongst us, it would really be very flat. I remember actually it was a British comedian doing this whole bit in some movie I was watching, and he was playing the devil, and he was in this cute little suit, very 1970s, and he was basically saying, why would I want to go to heaven? So boring. Everybody all the same, playing their little instruments and worshiping, and I just got a kick out of that. I was like, yeah, we need our differences, and we need a little bit of conflict actually to progress as a species. If there's no tension, there's no progress.
The unstable ape. And as you say, the variety is the thing. And okay, I just want to ask you some fun questions now. It's late in the evening here. It's time for some fun questions. What would you have a spare of if you could have a spare anything in anatomy, like an extra brain, an extra liver? What do you like? If you could just steal one, like Frank, people on the podcast can't see. He's pointing down. You mean your knee? Is that what you mean, Gil?
I think you call them bits over there.
As a spare. So
I
you're
don't
going
think
for
you
that.
can have enough of those. I wouldn't mind other versions of them. That would all be great.
Like a Tuesday night one, a Wednesday night one.
Yeah. Or why not have both at the same time? You know,
why not have both sets of bits? I would certainly like to experience that. I'd like to experience people who do, I guess. Okay, so any other organs, brain, like just this idea that we can...
I think I do with less brain and more heart. That's my...
Okay, I'd like a second heart. Okay, and any famous person, alive or dead, that you'd like to chop up? I'm not vivisect, like once they died of the natural causes. So like, would you like to do the anatomy of, you know, Abraham Lincoln or Caesar, or maybe, you know, someone like, I don't know, LL Cool J, anyone? Like, who would you love to cut up?
I think I'd want to do Oprah.
Oprah? Why Oprah?
Oprah, because Oprah is a person who I've watched over the course of her career and my life, struggling with her relationship with her body.
Right.
And I would love the chance to, when she passed and willingly donated her body, to use her as an example of how beautiful a human body is when there's no judgment placed upon it.
Some profound shit. I thought you were going to give me a funny answer, but that's...
Sorry, I leaned towards the profound.
You don't need to think your heart. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. I love it. Okay, so is it kind of a death meditation for you, being around so many cadavers? I mean, has it rubbed off on you? Has that, what's like, I want to ask you the questions you don't normally get asked. So like, what is the influence on you of being around dead humans all day long?
I have a profound appreciation for live humans as a result of being around dead humans. So I do find that as amazing as the dead are, that the living then are radiant. You know, I used to look at a person and see the life in their eyes, right? That's, I think, very common. We see life in the eyes, but I see life just shining off of the whole form, right? So because of that movement and the skin color and we're radiant beings and we don't even know it. So I think that's been part of the effect. Rather than
you've got a contrast as well, haven't you? You've got a great
contrast. It's the contrast. Yeah. So rather than growing cold and objective, I've grown more. I think I've grown more attuned to the gift of life.
If you spend a few weeks with lawyers and politicians, you have the same sensation when you go back to live humans. It's an entirely similar thing.
I've met one or two, and there's a certain extraordinary vibrancy to a politician that is simultaneously somehow channeled in a distorted way that becomes manipulative and power over other oriented. That surprised the heck out of me, because I couldn't help but notice the charisma.
Yeah. You meet someone, I won't name names, but this, you know, a friend of mine met one of your ex-presidents, for example, and said massively charismatic. Like you couldn't not look at him, is what she said. And how some of that is projection, I'm sure, because, you know, you've seen his image a lot of times. And I start to see people looking at me a little bit that way now, like looking at me with a certain, like, because they've seen my videos or heard my voice on the podcast a lot. It's a bit creepy, to be honest. Yeah. But then there's also, I notice, like, I'm like the mayor of a small town right now. Okay, so there's 250,000 people on the podcast. That's about the size of the town where I live, Brighton. And, you know, we're going to be up to sort of Liverpool or Birmingham size pretty soon. And it's like, you know, I'm not the only one there, but I'm the mayor kind of thing. That's how I look at it. And there's a way in which it is sort of inflating. It's like having that many eyes on you. You know, a friend of mine was a rock star before he was an embodiment teacher, and he talked to me about some of the sort of dangers of this. You know, that I think maybe some politicians start out manipulative, but there's also this way in which being given that much power gives you a certain, it's a temptation, to use an old-fashioned word.
That's right. It's a temptation. And so then the question is, what you gonna do with it? You know, and to constantly be re-inviting yourself to your service values rather than your the more egregious aspects of our egos that would become douchebags as a result of it.
No one tells you how not to be a douchebag. We're critical of douchebags, but nobody tells them how to stop the slide to douchedom. And I
You
think
know, you have to have people who you trust and love, who you charge with the task of calling you out on douchebaggery.
Okay, that's the trick. And I love this choice of the reorientation to service. For me, it's almost a daily choice. Like with the conference, I'm like, you know what? I'm making, this is my, how much money am I making chart, okay? And I can really get into that, and people become numbers, and chart. And, you know, have to take care of that shit, because we've got £1 million to make, or else it doesn't work, right? And there's, you know, a bit for the way there, which is a good start. But it's like, if I start orientating to numbers and people as numbers, and I have to just reorientate myself to service, and then I slide, and then I reorientate. It's like a daily, and if I do it daily, it's not that hard. But if I go 2 or 3 days into the douche, then that reorientation is 3 days hard. And for someone that's 3 years into the douche, that's real difficult.
Well, that's like accumulating fuzz.
There we go. The fuzz speech. I knew we'd get there. So do you want to explain about accumulating fuzz to people? Because it's a great concept.
Well, it's a great and grossly misunderstood concept, mostly because of the way that I represented it visually. And so I've spent the last X many years trying to correct it, even while new people are exposed to it. And the idea would be basically that that we get a little gummy over time. We get a little sticky, that we have an inner healer. I want to put it in a positive frame and say we have an inner healer and our inner healer and an inner healer, but as an inner healer, we have the capacity to close a wound, for instance, right? So we have, and that ability is on call 24/7, right? And it's anxious to do something. And we would be dead without that ability. And yet it comes at a price. And the price is that if we stop moving and become sedentary or inflammatory or dehydrated, then that inner healer goes to work and starts knitting together things that don't belong together necessarily. Right? And so we have it on, we have this gift on retainer. This is like an itinerant mendicant doctor inside of our body that will heal anything. And yet if we let it run, if we let it just start running around, then we'll get stuck a bit. And I use the analogy of fuzz, and I expose tissue in the body that actually belongs there. And so basically we have membranes in our body. They're very slippery and wet when we're living. And when we're embalmed and we tear the tissue apart, they look like cotton candy, or candy floss, as you call it over there in the UK. And that appearance stimulated me to say, look at what's that fuzz. When I was dissecting my very first cadavers for the first 10 years, I was like fascinated by this material. And of course, over time, I began to realize that it was ubiquitous, that it belonged there. It was part of human anatomy, and it was just not described in our books. And that during dissection, it's easy to mistake the actual meaningful connections between tissues as aberrant adhesions. And so for me, the learning curve was to be able to interpret the difference between the artifact of embalming that creates dry tissue, which when pulled apart look like cotton candy, and the actual membrane that's the anatomical basis of movement. So there is no movement without that fuzz. And then the question is, what is the quality and condition of it in our bodies? So if it's slippery as it's meant to be, then it creates connection between aspects of our body which have differential movement. So there's no space here, there's fuzz, and that fuzz is wet and slippery, and it permits one muscle fasciculi to move in a differential capacity relative to another one. We have all kinds of differential movement in our body. Our superficial fascia can move over our deep fascia via those membranes. If I desiccate the body and pull it apart, it looks like fuzz, and you might mistake it for an adhesion, but there are no actual spaces in the body. We have pure continuity. And then the question is, when movement is inhibited, is it possibly inhibited because we have agglomeration of tissues that would normally be sliding or slippery relative to one another.
And there is kind of that feeling, isn't it? You give the example of a cat stretching or someone that gets up in the morning. You know, there is kind of that feel that like, oh, things just need a bit of lubricating, moving around, you know, like, oh. And as I get a bit older, I notice I need to do a bit more of that. I've been noticing, you know, in my 40s now. So it's that sort of subjectively makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And my dog, all it has to do, our little pup Luna, all she has to do is hear her leash. And she immediately goes down into this down dog position with her butt way high up in the air. And she wriggles through her whole body. And then you put the leash on her and she's ready to pounce around.
Good to go. So the yoga she needs.
So just, sitting here on our butts for an hour, chit-chatting, we're literally inflaming our ass, right? Literally, we're pushing fluid out of the tissues and we're heating it up. And under those conditions, agglomeration occurs. In the most microscopic level, right? Not in a way that's going to ruin you, you know, but if you do it for 40 years, you know, and never go for a walk, well, expect to have limited differential movement at the most minute levels of your tissues. The mistake I made in my presentation of the Fuzz speech in that funny little 5-minute video that I put up so many years ago was to illustrate the concept with tissues that weren't problems. So I showed the 2 shoulder blades, and one of them has been dissected. It's been reflected from the body, and so there's literally air between the shoulder blade and the thorax, right? Well, that's not how we are. That's not human anatomy. And I implied that to be kind of a good representation of what it would be. And then I showed the other side, which was simply not dissected yet. And it suggested that it should be apart, like the dissected level. And that I regret, because I just didn't have good footage at the time. Now I have much better footage, and I'll share it in my anatomy. I put it on the conference Facebook group earlier, and a lot of people said it was a game changer for them. Like yoga teachers and different people said, you know, that little video, 5 minutes, 13 seconds, you know, you're just under 1 million hits now. Yeah, that's why I never took it down, because there are literally people who are asked to memorize it for their trainings. And they think I'm some kind of a Texan. I heard about a group in England, actually, who in some training, they were like, we had to memorize and perform the Fuzz speech. So I was like, that is hysterical. But
that's funny. It becomes, you know, you can annotate it after the event. That's a nice thing to do.
I did annotate it, and that's why I actually don't. I keep it up on YouTube, and you can turn the annotations off, of course, and it disappoints me when people do, because I really have spent many years trying to update it. So I write what I can and try and do it, but I don't take it down, because I know it does inspire people to move, and what mistakes are in there are kind of academic, really. All that matters is that it inspires movement, and that makes me happy.
It's not as well viewed as the cellulite speech, which is also there. I can see cellulite's not as popular, but it
hasn't been up as long, but
there is a phenomenon here, though, that you can put something on the internet 11 years ago. I've got things also on my YouTube channel from 11 years ago. There's a permanence to it. And even if you took it down, someone else you can scrape it and copy it and put it on their channel. Like that happens. And also the scalability, like years ago, to reach 1 million people, you'd have to be, you know, Muhammad or Jesus or something. You know?
Right.
Now you're just a guy with a cool video, or me with a little, you know, a cool conference or something.
All you have to do is trip over your cat, and you've got 1 million views.
There you go. I mean, that is a strange phenomena of the sort of scalability of the internet.
Yeah, and also the non-retractability of things, as you say, because I consider anyone who's a teacher to have, there's a certain degree of courage and chutzpah that it takes to actually just stand in front of people and say anything at all, knowing that most of it will be proven wrong eventually, if even by yourself. And so, you know, I have people criticize me. I have haters, believe it or not. And I'm like, you know something, whatever criticisms you're leveling at me, don't even compare to the ones that I level at me.
So are there anatomy haters? Is that a thing? There's anatomy haters. That's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Wow. People are, listen, Gil, this has been great. And we need to wrap up fairly soon. Is there anything that you feel really passionate about that you wish I'd asked you about?
I'm really passionate about rebranding the human body.
Okay.
That's kind of my larger overall mission, is to rebrand the human body from a problem to a gift. So I see that basically in our culture, we've problematized every conceivable aspect of the body and then commodified the solutions to the problems that have been created with respect to it. And I find that a better starting point is to just reject all of that and to learn to appreciate the body. And so that's kind of what I do. I try and show the body off, to show it off in its aspects of appreciation so people can be in a state of wonder, as you mentioned earlier, with respect to their body and appreciation, and use that as the starting point for change rather than self-hatred and problematization. So that's kind of where it all boils down to for me. And the gross anatomy and the words and all that, as valuable and relevant and interesting as they can be, are really secondary to me to the larger mission of just getting people to say, wow, I've got something here. And, you know, it doesn't matter rich or poor, sick or well. You know, even if you're sick, 98% of things are going right in your body. You know, on the day you die, there are trillions of successful operations happening there. So if we can kind of lean into the health that's always with us, and appreciate the gift, then I feel like I'm going in the right direction with what I'm trying to share.
Wonderful. I was got the sense that through anatomy, you were trying to point to something deep, you know, point to a whole way of being and a whole worldview almost. So yeah, makes sense there. I kind of had the feeling we might get on. I don't know why it was. There was something about your manner that I thought, I'm going to get on with this guy. So Gil, I've enjoyed this a lot. I always know when I've enjoyed an interview because it's, you know, I've just done a 12-hour day at work, and this, I feel energized by this. So that's pretty cool.
I'm honored to have added any energy to your 12-hour day, and to be the last ticket to be collected by the conductor for this day.
It's just spaghetti with my wife, and then a nighttime swim in the sea to go, and then it's go to bed and wake up and do it all again. That's
you know something. There's some dates at the end of this thing that should be on your calendar as a longer day off.
Oh no, it just says all of November just says spa/beach, depending on what COVID allows. I'm either going to be in an English spa or if I'm able to fly somewhere.
Well, go to Berlin, go to Vibali Spa. I understand they're back open again.
Oh, that's the shit, man. Last time I was in Berlin and I couldn't go to Vibali. They were all closed down. I've heard Vibali's the shit. I heard it's amazing.
Bali is awesome. I've been there many times.
Okay. Highly recommended. Spa guide. So, I'm teaching in Berlin a lot next year. So that's definitely on my list. So,
yeah. I hope I bump into you there.
Okay, Gil, this has been a real pleasure. We'll see you at the Embodiment Conference. In terms of finding your stuff, it's Gil, Gil, Hedley, HEDLEY.com, right? That's where people go to find your stuff.
That's it. Thanks, Mark.
On YouTube, if people put in Somanaut, they'll find all these videos we've been talking about as well. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you too. Have a great night and a good spaghetti.